Welcome to the Season 3 and series finale of the Blister and Muck podcast. For one last time, I'm your host, Jenny Mason. In this episode, the cathedral welcomes new residents. Will they find the bell tower inspiring? Have you ever moved into a new home? Have you ever watched as people moved into a house in your neighborhood? The entire experience can be so thrilling, with boxes stacked in corners, furniture clustered in odd groups, the back and forth business of people coming and going with more and more things. I wonder if the new residents in the bell tower will decorate. How might they embellish their new dwelling? Once they've settled in, will they host a housewarming party or some other kind of gathering? Speaking of bells, I have been struggling to figure out why I can't operate my doorbell. I just can't put my finger on it. Which reminds me of the time I was very sick and my friend sent me a card that read, "Get bell soon." She meant well. I suppose you can tell I'm rambelling. Perhaps I am engineering some conversational side alleys to avoid arriving at the depot of real discussion. Who can blame me? After all, it's the last time we get to ponder tough questions. The last time we will confront the world's most unsolvable mysteries, like, what is the difference between magic and science? What is family? Is there such a thing as a bad idea? What is friendship? And if we think back to the last episode, we definitely need to ask, what is the difference between winning and losing? Our heroes fought hard to upend Jana van Sangfroid's sinister plans. They certainly seemed successful. Jana, Mrs. Chiptooth Chettingley, and Vexler Q. Drummel will never again terrorize another animal. The junk castle was destroyed, along with all the animal trapping and zapping technology. No more unsuspecting creatures will be kidnapped and addled. These are tremendous victories. And yet, I know what you're thinking. Sure, we gained a lot in the outcome of that battle, but didn't we lose so much more? In movies and books, we often see winners claiming all the glory and all the prizes. Winning teams score all the points in the championships. Winning armies claim all the spoils of war. Meanwhile, the losers forfeit everything. However, if we take a moment to consider what really happens in our real lives, we can point to plenty of instances where a loss creates a gain. Losing leads to winning. For example, think back to when the COVID-19 pandemic led to global lockdowns. When we lost the ability to be busy with school or work, we gained the time to be silly and creative, or maybe just still and quiet. When we lost time with our friends, we gained time with our family. And if we glance at history or current events, we see that there are wars which can only be won when the victorious fall on the battlefield. I bet many of you listening could also point to a time in your life when you acquired the most fantastic, bestest best friend you'd ever had in the history of ever. If you're lucky enough to say that friend is still in your life, I salute your good fortune. If, however, this friend is gone, I'd be curious to know what you gained from that loss. I bet you could name something. Something wonderful. Something almost inexplicable. Something utterly undeniable. Episode 20. A Never-Ending Feast. If you were asked to list some fossorial animals, you might readily catalog the badger and the rabbit. No doubt you would include other tunnelers like the mole, the wharf rat, the prairie dog, the groundhog, and the ferret. We mustn't forget the armadillo, the tarantula, and the ant. But what about grief? Would you think to list grief as a type of fossorial creature? It too digs deep tunnels. It excavates right to the rock-hard center of us. Like the miner who strikes the mountain with his shovels and pickaxes, so grief strikes and hollows us. Perhaps that is why we say people are grief-stricken, or that is, struck. I can also tell you that grief works like a sculptor who strikes with a chisel to reshape the stone. So too does grief reshape us. It rarely reshapes our outsides. You can be grief-stricken and still look exactly the same as you always did. Unless you're crying, most people will have no idea you've been struck by grief. Meanwhile, under the surface and deep in your soul, grief digs and hollows. Your inner stores of gold love, copper dreams, and silver hope leak out. Every gem of joy disappears. A heaviness seeps in and occupies those excavated caverns. It pushes away air. It leaves no room for sound. It stretches light to its thinnest, most brittle breaking point. We can lose our way in these grief-cut tunnels. Hapless and mapless, we descend into a dark world. Resurfacing, returning to the light, can take many weeks or many years. In some cases, that resurfacing never happens. In still other cases, one can reach the surface briefly, carry out basic tasks, and then descend to the dark and heavy hollows. Resurface, submerge, resurface, submerge. Such was Muck's condition in the weeks following the collapse of the Van Sangfroid castle. That he could find his way in and out of grief on a regular cycle should not suggest his grief was somehow small or insignificant. On the contrary, his suffering was mighty. It just wasn't novel. Believing he'd lost his family in a tragic fire had already struck Muck with grief. Many tunnels traversed his soul already. Alongside living with blister and learning how to survive, he had also learned to navigate those tunnels. He knew how to move between the inner and outer realms, between dark and light. In other words, he already had a map for sadness. That map proved essential in the busy circumstances he encountered after Janna's castle collapsed. Dr. Jan van Sangfroid went to live with Orville at the zoo. Despite his doddering, he became Gorgeous George's most dutiful caretaker. As it turned out, they knew many of the same songs, which they crooned during George's daily bubble baths. Janna's former lab assistants secured work with Barty and Bertie, who were very much in need of good help, what with exciting expeditions planned to study exotic animals on faraway continents. The assistants were more than happy to dedicate their scientific careers to two gentlemen who would never require them to make or handle monsters. However, this is not to say they went unpunished. The lab assistants bore the unfortunate task of recreating much of Janna's research so that they could transform the officers of the Rebalanced Society back into human form. The cats, being cats, drained away on that rainy night to find new homes. They resettled wherever a saucer of milk was easily acquired. Did they not mourn over the loss of Janna? Did they not sulk or tear up remembering her affections? Did they not miss being her itty-bitty kitty committee? I can tell you that they certainly would have felt this way if they remembered any of it. But because they were cats, they did not. Their minds were much like the beach sand, with all marks of day wiped flat at high tide. Try not to mistake this frame of mind for stupidity or fecklessness, rather as a very advanced state of meditative transcendence. Indeed, the feline's ability to remain always in a present moment never tugged backwards by regret, and never shoved forward by future anxiety, is one that many a Buddhist monk labors to achieve through lifelong practice. Meanwhile, Madame Petruska had the tricky task of resettling her entire animal rescue syndicate in the aftermath of its sudden evacuation. The creatures could not immediately return to the caverns under Excess Capital Bank because of the arrival of Mr. Itchy-Tusk's oryx herd. Luckily, the cathedral was available as a secondary location for all rescue and resettlement efforts underway. Countless creatures roamed the entirety of the cathedral, from crypts to apse. Turtles, turkeys, toucans, and a three-toed sloth, a fox, a ferret, a family of guinea fowl, all of them, like all of us, en route with either a job to do or a question to ask. Indeed, Muck was traveling up the cathedral's spiral stone stairway amidst a steady flow of animal traffic when he met Mire, Crud, Fungus, Yuck, and Ooze on their way down.
"Just the rat I was hoping to see,"
Mire said.
"Indeed? How can I be of sincere service?"
When the operatives stopped to chat, traffic in the stairwell briefly tangled. A waddling pelican crashed into a shuffling pangolin. A swan honked. Snakes redirected their S-hugs up the walls. Mire nodded at the armful of shredded fabric clutched to his belly.
"These old banners are pretty wrecked. Do you want them for anything?"
Crud, Fungus, Yuck, and Ooze held similar bundles. Muck noticed the faintest traces of white letters, the ghosts of the pirate slogans he had painted not so long ago. His heart wriggled.
"I believe these have served their purpose. You may judiciously jettison them however you like," Muck said.
"Grand," Crud replied.
"Now that the crypts are all cleaned out, we were hoping to dress them up a little."
"Anything to make them feel less creepy,"
Fungus commented as they resumed their descent downstairs. Ooze chuckled. "You can take the creeps out of the crypts, but you can't take the crypts out of the creeps, eh?"
"Have you ever heard the likes? That doesn't make any sense,"
Crud complained.
"Does so, eh?"
"Doesn't."
Muck completed his own circular circuit up the stairs. The belfry had hardly changed, and yet it felt foreign to Muck, almost like a place he'd seen in a dream. Only a few tall stacks of candle boxes remained. Loose candles had been bundled together and stacked like lumber. Puss stood on Fleet's back, directing a crew of operatives undertaking the task of polishing the bell. More than a quarter of it now gleamed with a bright, brassy skin. Sunlight spied on all the activity through the floret holes in the cupola.
"Hola, Muck!"
Fleet smiled. "Howdy," Puss drawled. Spindle zipped around the room, chasing and retrieving a beetle carapace. He had convinced Madame Petruska to stop her work and play. She waved at Muck as she tossed the carapace to him.
"Well, are you being ready?"
"As ready as I'll ever be."
"You are looking ready. More so than I am ever seeing you looking."
Even though Muck regularly assumed a strong, upright posture, and even though he could hardly recall how to slouch, he always felt a little taller whenever Madame Petruska praised him. Spindle wriggled his back end, crouching at Muck's feet, eyes locked on the carapace. Muck scratched the soft, furry spot just behind the spider's many eyes.
"You are such a silly spider. Yes, you are. Yes, you are."
Muck spoke in the pudding-thick words often reserved for pets or babies. He flung the carapace across the belfry. Spindle shot after it. In the pool of wheat-yellow light spilling through the window, Rip stretched out, stroking his tongue over his shoulder. Slackjaw stretched out nearby, as usual, imitating all of Rip's actions and gestures. Rip grinned when he saw Muck approach.
"Today is the day?"
Indeed it is. Seltzer and Horchata fluttered down from the crossbeams. Are you nervous? Seltzer asked. Nervous, confident, happy, sad, terrified, fearless. I am all the emotions you can collectively contemplate. Muck hugged himself to curb the occasional empty and floating sensations that prickled beneath his fur. Horchata wrapped her wings around him. It'll be great. You'll be great. He returned the hearty squeeze.
Best of luck.
Rip tapped Muck's head with his tail.
Send us a postcard,
Seltzer said. Slackjaw's crossed eyes glistened when he said,
happy trails.
Muck offered many bashful thanks. Then he pointed to the window, asking, Is he... He received a round of nods in answer. Muck ascended the window casement, using the candlebox step despite not needing to. Blister dozed against the casement. Dr. Stowe had mummified him with bandages and plaster casts. Muck sat as quietly as he could, but Blister opened his eyes nonetheless.
Shouldn't you be at the harbor?
I still have a couple of hours. Their feet dangled in the crisp air. Winter was coming, but at least for today, it seemed to have gotten lost along the way, distracted or diverted, who knew where. A great burp of colored balloons wafted up from one of Blaakrust's burrows.
A celebration?
Blister asked. According to the newsboys, women can vote.
Everywhere?
Just in Blaakrust.
Wow.
Blister exhaled.
It's a good start.
After a pause, he added,
I noticed they finally completed that new building, the one they call a skyscraper.
They did? Muck leaned forward, scanning the jagged line of Blaakrust city center. Muck admired the shiny glass and metal tower a moment, then said, I see several of the rotten roadways have been permanently paved. He pointed them out.
Ticks and maggots,
Blister sighed.
If progress can come to Blaakrust, just imagine how it is elsewhere in the world.
Just then, Muck felt grief's pickaxes scrape at more tunnel walls. He did not want to go, and yet he knew he could not stay. He said, I'll be diligently dutiful and let you know.
I'd like that,
Blister nodded.
To hear from you, that is.
Oh, I shall write with rabid regularity.
In Swahili.
Blister slid a sly glance at Muck, who laughed. I wish you'd faithfully finished reading that troublesome telegram. It would have saved us a truckload of trouble. Blister nodded, his eyes closed. Muck looked down at the street in front of the cathedral. Oh, I wish you could come. Blister grinned.
Your family is going to be so happy to see you. There'll be nothing but blubbery tears and mushy sentiments for days, maybe even weeks. Me and mushy stuff don't get along.
I find that statement absolutely accurate, Muck nodded, his brow set at a playful angle. Although you would make the most practical pocket handkerchief. He tugged on Blister's bandages.
Very funny.
Blister bumped Muck sideways. Muck bumped back. You know I'll come back.
You know I'll be here when you do.
After that, they leaned against one another and watched the little balloons drift across the horizon and its fluffed, frosting clouds. With the sunlight reflecting off the ocean in the distance, I assure you, it was easy to mistake the horizon for a cupcake nested in a silver wrapper, topped with sprinkles. In that moment, the whole world resembled a never-ending feast. The end.
A million, cajillion, bazillion thanks to all of you across the country and around the world who followed the saga of Blister and Muck. I felt so lucky and so honored when these two mismatched rats showed up out of the blue and began to share with me the incredible story of how they overcame all their differences and all their assumptions to forge an unbreakable friendship. Neither hunger nor the world's wickedest schemer could break this bond. I have to say, I learned how to be a better human and a better friend by spending time with these rats, and I hope that's true for you as well. I hope all of you enjoyed hearing this story as much as I enjoyed telling it. For a limited time, you can still download any and all episodes from all 3 seasons for free. Later in 2022, the content will shift to a new home where listeners will have to pay a nominal amount to enjoy the story. My sincerest thanks to everyone who ever made a donation to support the podcast at blisterandmuck.com. Golden gratitude to everyone who purchased Blister and Muck t-shirts, hats, or totes. All of you helped offset what I paid out of pocket to purchase music rights, sound effects, or pay for hosting and storing all the content online. I hope you'll join me over at my main website, where you'll never miss out on the new books and exciting stories I have coming out. Subscribe for occasional updates at ginnymason.com. That's JYNNEMASON.com. Special thanks to Roland Rudzitis for creating the magical and memorable music that served as the Blister and Muck theme song, as well as the season finale scores. Additional music from John Bartman, Kevin MacLeod, and Mon Plaisir. Animal sounds from Carolyn Ford, Christopher, Mings, Erdy, Partners in Rhyme, Snapper 4298, Daniel Simon, and Mike Koenig. Seaside sounds from Mike Koenig and Daniel Simeon. Cityscape sounds from Daniel Simeon and J.U. Sound ideas at Pond 5 tooted the calliope. All other sounds from the public domain. Now and forever, I am grateful for my family, friends, and fans. One for one, and all for you.